high, 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 low. Hello. The foot, the feet, the fetus. A sky moving towards an absolute white. Delicacy, delinquency. Pittura! Masaccio, Angelico, Veneziano, white and absolute potential. White in the along, the between, the and, the Borgo San Sepolcro. Without sepulchre. 5 angels, 2 horizontal loons. The matter of 5 tongues, The single and, Merde. White. Not a wind, Captures. If this is the influx, the saddle takes the finger, on this lies blue cloth. Closest to an ass to pass pasture. Meander. Me and her andering. Up there. Deject. On the road, up the river, between the middle buck. Pause. In readership, in should be silent. In on up the as the ridella predelizione. That we fall, that we come big in arena. That boy. The time in Padua. What turnips! Essential Saint Agatha Clare sent essential. Quint! Ain't it? Up, let's squint. That's the cheekbone that Batista's face on up in of the land beyond fact. I hand stand. I understand. But the chisel half recedes. There are eye levelings. If the barrel... Oh, imago! Oh, imagine. Asian. A reminder on remainder. A sarcophagus. Architrave. That point, that trinity, that twit. Comes the eye through love to perfect you. Up front minus Q, minors plus. Crap. Lost. Paradise regained. Author becomes pattern. Patterns becomes. 1 beat, 2 beats, 3 beats. Looking to where the square moves. Through a fig, bark, through a crow's sprint. lose it. Oh-oh. Wasting his strength, length, long, becong, belong, Ceylon. So long. We are but living is, so that us no place is stranger. What to howdy, partner? What tales, wattles? Icarus, dead loss, myth spelt. Move towards circuitous, towards the two dots, towards his eyes, towards the labyrinth, not as towards a minotaur within, but not as not at, but towards Valamanica, her admonition, not a demon, not at one, not with his home, towards his home. The pattern not to wear to underwear. We meet, not the eyes, not see towards the buck. Piss. Just passing the wheat. You think. Quit the quiet, quit the quit. Quite white. Do how you are. Does how it is. Hey! Bravo! How it is. How is it you are? How it is. Noun floor. Hidden names, verb erase. The plural masters. The preposition of the article, this space, place, this proper name for lethargy. Insect spider, star sun, verb weaves, and connections, holy sancta, you shift the key. You have walked past the participle form of this, his, is. The article noun damp. Space. The damps in the heart. Spain. Noun, medical, everywhere, here, air, remaining. The fact, the hard fact, the fat, hard folio fact, the imposed fact by that Bourbon hard Charles III folio fact. Restriction on a peer's elegance, whoosh! Entwurf. Eine historische Architektur in rare. Copied it, the preparatory, bread, reading red, Patmos, spherical, atmosphere. At most, at loss of, afterwards, in towards, that evidence which bleeds, that evidence which sketches, as well as by the, does not end here, does not end here, doesn't end here. In the mind of Syracuse, these were the words of Theodosius. Priscillianist machinery for men, and all the concepts placed near Nabu. The fabric of these trials within pollution. In 1845, Marx takes the dialectic as a law of motion defined in conflict. A vitriolic frontier letter. Capitalism equals the poor people's property. So either we imagine a theory or else an epistemology. The highest building in Paris still is. To control the forces of nature, the concept of synthesis must also delineate. It must be past, it must be over, it must be finished. There can be no special wishing, no schematic account. The passage written only after reading it, so that politics puts poetry aside. Compulsion to repeat shrub, shrunk, shrug, shrub, shrewd. How about a cactus, said St. Cyprian. Droll. Fool. Jewel Hill gel, but there aren't any listeners. Infacticity. The logic of inquiry is the logic of language. Construction illégitime, la paroi, l'écran. Par combien? Folio 42 recto. Du bras ta vue, de distance trouble. Suis la ligne. Tu tresseras. Principio leaves them to find the slides. Se trouve le point fait au hasard dans ce carré. His word was pavimenti, meaning checkerboard. It's a socialist method about the hexagon. Pensez, hello, I'm one of Father Monge's oldest pupils. Blaise, 1798. Pascal, 1794. Aperçu, historique et Monge, Conçu, etc. Ah, l'école normale, etc. Und damit die ganze Linear, etc. Ein Anderaug. But did the ancients know the square root is -1? Which of the observer's eyes? Where is the so-called Communist Party headquarters? Who removed folio 7 from the facsimile of the 1538 edition? Who lost the Nuremberg piracy in the print room? Where was Dürer's home prior to 1525? The logic of inquiry is the logic of language. In the same way we set Paris dancing. In 1956, 841 persons were referred to as, quote, hooligans. In January, it was Cayenne. In March, Redon. In April, Mulhouse. White-collar meeting designed to implicate staff in retaliation. Stalin greets the student avant-garde. Bottles thrown at every new leader. 30,000 zlotys levied in obligatory fines. The body is blunt and flat to the right. There are victims of shadows, too, of worker team functions. We say the functional right is to the news, arterioles and the struggle of Che Guevara and the dust of second-hand bookstores. Il padrone who needs you. Mit bestimmt. But the best weapon is the general strike. And see, these which are tapping bladders. Renault is in revolt, but how? Le messagerie about le faculté. Sud-aviation workers. Uterine sinuses on the Sorbonne staircase. The meshes are a stroma of between specifically student demands in the small mesocholic areas. Lenin described President Pompidou as an adult mouse. But elsewhere, it could be during the evening. Mr. Rivington pointed out that a valve involves the entire national level of demands. S-E-S-N-U-P definitely isn't U-N-E-F. Calm determination. Among union officials, the dorsalis hallucis intact. They cited Waldau on the stroma, Henley on the rectum, Kurliker on the pseudo-revolutionary phase. Real students caught in crossfire, Kent State Medical Inquisition as Alberti plunges into a pool of gasoline. Briefly, board-qualified union conditions convoke leptus, board exists, members coordinating appointed legal, realize, assume, become liquidators, fight back, factional fiasco, distributing and have, demand sabotage very quickly, very knifing, signified, customary, and able to decide on the unorganized capital. Examinations, buildings, Stalinist quotations to represent Mao as a basic call together. Claim should be for independent transform, lacking elections. The movement is social, to assert an entire abolition. André Burgeoning, Trotsky, John Milton, de Gaulle. Dissolution revoked body cavity yolk sac sector of what is awareness equals no other choice than direct seizure. It is a line passing through the 2 points of a template, a very poor verbal tautology to sound cinema. Happenings I will not write about. Terrible deeds echoed up from the cenotes of cheeks, mist swollen, carved across the hills where the ski lift hung, abandoned by the ashtray, cut in the same hewn stone he carved the eagles out of, placed on the pillars of his Reichstag where the lichen congregated. Reconnoitering the fallen words from lips already fallen from their mouths with face detached and feces placed inside the wild gyrations of those infinite combination de flank, wrinkled flesh, that powerful militias etched into the thighs of his maternal generals, dammed up widowhood inside the confines of a gland reduced to war upon the surface muteness of their stones. The lithic presence of the moss unshaven, centuries of beard and shrunk mustachios. His breath! Noxious and uneaten, wind-retaliating mushrooms through the shoe-holes of the flagellants. The sounds in modulation, fading strata of the creatures trapped, approaching. Focus, all the rainstorms on the southern slope. Fresh sweat on his forehead, fever, urine, sweet, and held hand that longest member of the Reich, placed firm in all the heat that centuries had blinded to the eyes of his potassium servants, those interpreters of valves and vessels, deaths in the eyes turned verbal in descriptions, the copper complex lattice works, the red-hot blood, the pain of bald eyebrows on the wrinkled arterial zones of his verbs acerb. All the vasomotor drives of panic, lamentation, everyone, everyone hearing still the songs that by his own decree only a Führer could hear as he raised his head up out of smegma into the leisure of impressionistic strabismus, past the reaches of his voice. Myopic, untenable. The faltering tenor traces of the words he marked as doomed impassable in neutral climax held entropic in the vector of a western front. He stood alone in a bunker of misunderstanding, arranging discourse into memoirs that promised all the air of unlocked epochs and the paradox of ponderous breath. Abating as the tablets disappearing on his tongue's tip moved the teeth's dead human future. I'm going alone. I'm gone long and loose through the lustre of sentiments. The tears for all his generals, memorizing names within the hired space of retrieval. His secretary is sitting in dictation, writing where the name should end, the story start in deeds impossible to tell. Life passed over in a mimic cliché of the alpine outskirts. Over leaf, his mind a rift, a sediment, a paste, a phenomenon, a metabolite, the metabolics of escarpments as he writes, and they repeat to him how in his death he will become the last great geological event, a self dying into writing, entering through words the part of him which dies to live again against the pain of eyes, strained sufferance, the type of words moved inward, threatening the groundwork of his contradictions, looting his necropolis of cradles, crying loud, unbearable. I am. These are the words he made me speak. And from the pressure of his nights, the dream of morning time corroded, and the nostrils of his ancestors who breathed his mother's crime. It is my mother's fault. It is my mother who I am, her curse above the swamp cloud of his cot. The eyes of a decrepit alligator, missing limbs, the stale clothes of the menials, the menopause, a hint of hit, lust, hallucinations in the heaps of fetid amanitas itemized in state-engendered documents, the curious mass deaths 8 decades before the fall, when he had dreamt of the invasion of Stalingrad by emasculated armies, all in movements on sierras of their fetish, sex, triumphant, all disguised in absent genitalia, glands, the violence of their plaudits and their ineradicable itches of their mass clitoritic scars and the previous encounters. And he would reminisce upon his own asymmetries of sex, conceived for world release in death before the sound of human voice, and ever vocalized a year before his first divorce, and a little after the epical scenario of his own self-immolation in the flames of the galactic whore he christened ideology. Connection of lust to the lust of rhythm in amoeba fixed, gelatinous sunrise vaguely, historical part mind, part vagina, intertwined where he would quote Plotinus to her on the nature of psychotic animalcules, and his own black Aryan sperm would splash upon this background of citation. After all, they're all neutral legends from the camps of leper months. constant patterns of recycling. The honored feast day of his first ejaculation, when all the nations had trembled and saintly eyes bore witness to his potations, and all the bureaucratic widows memorized in detail hagiographies, closed eyes they put in song. The oscillation of his brainwaves. Spent in verbiage, referential and demonic as those cold nights at a desk which held a midnight oratory of ink, disturbed and distributed on a hirsute surface. It's a living skin where he describes in words a garden planted for his mother's use. A little after sunrise on that restless dawn of intercepted menopausal muscle, insect, incest, sound, and agitation in the page where politics should be. Politics should be where he wanted words to lie as beautiful as Jews. His mind, all this time in oscillation, somewhere between awareness of the repetitions and the undeniable conviction of an end. But it is here at last, in the center of an eagle's eye, manipulating context. And he would instigate us transforms through the yellow cortex of his mother, the scarred plasma of excessive intellections. In daily sacrifice, his wives would annotate this transform. His voice, rising in pitch through contours of magnolia past the curves of shadow that define his victim's eyes. And he would summon in soprano devastation, executions in the stalags, phonic and intestine. And for his own mother's love, he would toss the night's black grasshopper dreams in bed, making love upon the bodies of countless maternal generals, field marshals, admirals who would combine as concubines in replication of his single dream, Madonna's dream. In the dream of metal breasts, at the vaginal vortex of his birth, where he would plunge in search of wart cures, barter genocide for cruises through the corridors and Kremlins of his madness, along the vascular complexities of pubic nerve, until he woke in heated sweat, erect at the sight of his own massage, mindful to move to that final April of childhood in the small hut by the abandoned ski lift, where he conceived his revolution in those dreams of his beginning with the thought of skirts. A year before the internecine struggle in the uterine room inscribed already in the pages of his diary, before the syntax of his times composed the loss of France, of the Sahara, of all his Stalingrads, towards his mother's final death into the syntax description carved in bitter runes on all the oak doors of his disused consulates, the ruined walls of stews where youthful North became his Jewish tropics, the heat from fruitless trees where bodies hung, the syphilitic bark of eucalyptus dogs. It was a confused memory with a palimpsest of former putures, buffalo and salamander limbs, the zoomorphic limits of his lusts, his needs, his body's pace. One day, close to the pentad of his departure, they recited the final catalogue of his books Anaximander, the fragments, the Moralia of Plutarch, the Apology and Treatise of Ambroise Paré, Fracastor's Treatise on the Syphilis, Hans Breitmann's Ballads, the Narratio Primus of Rheticus, the History of the Steam Engine by Dr. Dionysius Lardner, Gessner's Cain, and Chambers' Complete British Poets. And they recited his dreams and memoirs. And finally he spoke. Write down my final words. They will be whispered to achieve perpetual, fresh death. We need a structural heat repeating, and these we shall call dyings and returns and libraries. And write down how the best deaths are the whispered ones, and how the strength of the crocodile is the river it is in. And write down that I have always believed that sex is art and hate, in which this war is the small reincarnation of a lost pornography. And write down that I wanted language to free me from what defines me. Think about that. And then write how language is our definition, and think no more. And write down how language frees us from what defines us, and so defines for us what freedom is. And tell my mother, if it is too late for me to die, because every genius is already born dead, then tell her she tied me by the strings of my own genitals to truth and sex and death, and that we have lived that way, and we have enjoyed each other. Bedrock of material, a deep and a temporal pterygoid. The parent distribution still anastomized in glaciated places. Acidic, gray, white, pink, intense, fixation of descending palatines. Extremity of fangs in pulp of teeth. The mesenteric branches of the face. Fauna of the bottom waters, the remains of shells, feldspars and rhyolite. The cold, arid climate on the roof. tetrapods through all the plankton levels, fossa and intraorbital canals, the large-eyed phacopods in mud, conifer gabbro, basalt, gneiss and shale algal tissue on the shallow shelves. Branches and structures, the sudden barking of a dog preceding the foramen ovale, open ends of grain, the intense blueness of a warm, shallow sea, intrapolypoidal skeletal integration, deciduous forests to the south, edrioasters in the distance, the outer surface of a buccinator. Branch passageways into muskog, regosol and podsol. A biotherm in layered sand and mud. Benthic systems in the sediment. Grey, brown, humic glycol. Divisions into the lateral wall of mucus towards the inner angle of the orbit. Red, oscillating fruit belts to the east. Bone canals and sandstone lineaments. The intense debris of the estuary, genuinely dolabra and lingula. The fusular tissue of the half rings, cold inches to the western slope. Deciduous yellow acid brown organic aspen permafrost. Low shrub to lichen. Sunrise through the thecal aperture as water pours itself a narrow shelf. A cell runs forward in a groove. Phylocarid tracings, an entire colony of web-like linkages. The intense solidity of the upper jaw. Dolomite and limestone. Rhabsodomic twilights by the base canal. Omohyhoids in platysma centers of accumulation. The slow advance of ice, the intense sweep of wave vectors, action space. By the lower borders, a seed moves out behind a sheath. A different winter chills the south, intense. Embedded fascia, every pore vein brown clay called till. Fenested to shell fragments, skull striated by congealing horizontal blood irregularities of knobby steep topography. Fluted long, low, undulating rills. Subclavian triangularities descending through branches of the plexus. Mesoplica, anchored in the substrat friction from the porous port. External jugular running, vertical thin, bony lamella. Fixated mucus lateral wall bone, extending chin curve, intense current descent, blood vertical filaments, young cochlea. The thin and bony cribiforms of complex layers in dura mater. An intense magenta from the first rib towards the axilla. The intense curve of a nose, a cavity of part, spot perforated vessel ganglion, carotid palpebrate distribution. Anterior inosculation shellfishes. Motivation circle system, apex, lung. A borderline of vessels in the lower nerve, a gradual limb. The lung, the sympathetic soft clavicular capillary. Middle zone spirality, muscular profound arch from passage downward, caught above oblique, subaccipitals at the site. Silhouetted bodies of the vertebrae, muscular, intense. Clinoid process in the filaments, an orbit through the optic foramen. From the lacrimal lid to the sclerotic circuit of a cell, a temporal and inferior meatus. Ganglionic frontal fissures in a single trunk. Lenticular and sometimes caudate nuclei. The motivation of ascending frontal convolutions, the angular gyrus of the circle, a borderline of nerves and the gradual softening of the green medullary system. Face, Vein, the intense silhouette of bodies. Infundibulum and corpora abliacanti, a spine, the intense glow of skin over the acromion.